I am a hypocrite, okay? I'm a hypocrite. You can call me a hypocrite. You can watch this video and be like, we know what you said about 3 weeks ago about a different series, and your tone was very different than this. And I'm going to acknowledge that I am a hypocrite. But you want to know what? I don't care because I am very giddy about this new young Poirot. It was about 3 weeks ago, about a month. I sat here and I told you that I wasn't convinced that we needed yet another Sherlock Holmes. And I certainly wasn't convinced that we needed a young one. And here we are with the news that there's going to be a young Poirot, and I am so excited about it, can't contain myself. And yeah, if that makes me a hypocrite, then so be it. I am the first to put my hand up and be like, David Suchet is the only Poirot we will ever need. No one can top it. Why mess with perfection? You're not going to improve it. And I do still believe that. I really, really do. But welcome back to the rumor mill, you guys. I'm Kayla. This is the sister podcast to the YouTube channel Regency Rumors, where we talk about all things period dramas, history, and historical fiction. And I've never been more torn about something in my head and my heart than this before, and we got to talk about it because the BBC are announcing there is a new Poirot on the way, and he's young and he's hot. So the BBC released a single photo of Edward Bluemel. I think it's Bluemel. I've just realized that I've never said his name out loud in the same way that I've never said David Suchet's name out loud. And a lot of people have called me out because I keep saying Suchet, which I feel like is a more fun way to say it, but whatever. You gotta say people's name the right way. I was not mentally prepared for a young Poirot. Like, that's not where my mind went at all. But as soon as I saw this and I saw who the casting was, I was like, I'm excited about this against my will. It turns out that if you tempt people with certain actors and roles, your principles go out the window. All right, so before I accept my weakness to this young Poirot, I need to establish my purest credentials to you. So we're going to start out with David Suchet because he is the gold standard, and I do not want you guys thinking that I'm just some fangirl that is going to fall for every adaptation. Okay, so David Suchet played Poirot for I think 24 or 25 years, so 1989 to 2013, and he completed 70 of Christie's Poirot series. I think it was all of the Poirot novels. I could be wrong. And I cannot imagine that happening today because everything is canceled so quickly. Like, I feel like there's been a number of murder mystery reboots, just reboots in general, where they're like, oh, we're going to bring this show back. And then they reboot it and it only gets like 1 or 2 seasons. And then it goes back into the ether again. And you're like, okay, well, why did we even reboot this in the first place? I am worried about them bringing out a fresh new take of a younger character and then it getting like 1 season and flopping. Currently, Agatha Christie adaptations haven't been all that popular anyways. So I don't know why we don't just come up with some new ideas and let people love the older things, but that's not what film studios do these days. From what I've heard, David Suchet was so protective of Poirot and making sure that Poirot honored Christie. And I really believe that him being so anal about establishing a version of Poirot that was true to him, but very true to Agatha Christie as well, is why people love it so much and why all of the different series holds up so well. The amount of times that I've come on here and talked about the ways we have seen the difference between audiences responding negatively and positively to adaptations that are reminiscent of the author's original text versus not. I think most books would not have gotten as popular as they were if people didn't love the main characters as they already are. So why touch them so much on screen and enrage a bunch of people, and then it doesn't have the staying power years and years later where people are still watching it through different decades? Like, why not just try and get it as close to the books as you can get it so that the people who fell in love with it on page are going to fall in love with it on screen? So prior to Suchet, on-screen Poirots were often played a bit broader, kind of ridiculous comic relief. Suchet gave the role more depth, I feel like, by grounding Poirot's like severe eccentricities, like his intense neatness and his meticulousness. And you got to see like layers of loneliness and psychological gravitas that I feel like some of the film adaptations in the past weren't either able to cover or just didn't put on screen. I don't know, like I want to put his version of Poirot in a little pocket and like keep him safe forever, if you know what I mean. Like he's just so adorable. I just want to protect this Poirot at all costs. I think his aim to be so book focused really helped this Poirot be the most popular version ever. I saw an interview that he did on This Morning, which is a British morning talk show, where he said that it was the least watched episode of Poirot out of all of them because he thinks people didn't want it to finish and that they didn't want to see him in that like elderly state. And I completely understand because I have never seen the last Poirot, what is it, episode or special. I've never seen it because I was the same. I didn't want to see him that way, and I didn't want Poirot's story to end with David Suchet, which is why I think when Sherlock Holmes was killed off by Arthur Conan Doyle, that audiences were enraged and he was pushed to bring back Sherlock Holmes. He finally caved because people were like, you can't kill off Sherlock Holmes. Like, he's not supposed to die. Are you kidding me? I am of the opinion that I think these investigators should never die. It's just that one of their stories is the last one. Do you know what I mean? And I feel that way about Poirot. Like, I don't feel like Poirot should die. Like, it's just that there was one story and then there wasn't any more, So, and maybe in a way going back to like the young Poirot where we're nowhere near the end of his life is a way to make it feel more fun and like you've got so much of his story and life to go through so that you don't feel depressed about the end. I feel like we live in a world where actors do always have to chase the next big thing and to become as famous as they possibly can. Teenage, whatever, Twilight, Hunger Games, all of those types of series, those actors are like trying to move away from them as quickly as they possibly can. I feel like David Suchet is a great example of being so dedicated to a role, not wavering from it till the very end, and us all having huge respect for that. And I would love to see that more in other period dramas, to be honest with you. So briefly, who are some of the other Poirots that we've had in the past? There is some interesting and controversial Poirots out there. All right, so Albert Finney, Murder on the Orient Express from 1974. I always forget Albert Finney was a Poirot. He's so young here, I feel like. Finney holds a unique distinction as the only on-screen Poirot that Christie herself lived to see. And by most accounts, I think she was largely pleased with him, and he got an Oscar nomination for it. She did, however, have notes about the mustache, which tells you how serious she was about her own characters. This had a star cast with Sean Connery, Ingrid Bergman, Lauren Bacall. Need I say more? The thing was, though, for me, I really struggled with Finney's accent in this adaptation. I think there's a lot of older films that really resonated with audiences at the time, and then later on it can come off as like cheesy or shallow to a new audience because culture is different and we've advanced so much in how we communicate with one another. But I really feel like we can acknowledge that at the time when adaptations come out, that they seem really serious and real to people that are watching them. And I know the stuff that is being made right now, 20 years from now, young people are going to look back and be like, oh my gosh, that feels so manufactured, or the acting seems so cheesy in that, or everybody had these fake accents. And now we look back on the transatlantic accent that was in a lot of films back in the day, and we're like, wow, that is so put on. But I think there's going to be accents today, social media accents that people put on, or AI voice that people use, that audiences are going to look back and cringe and be like, oh, I can't watch those films. There's just something so cheesy about them. So this Murder on the Orient Express was taken very seriously at the time. I just personally, now in this day and age, have a hard time sitting through it. But that doesn't mean that it's not a good adaptation. This is where I think actors feel differently about their projects and processes. They wanted Albert Finney to do a sequel, and he was like, I don't see the point. Like, once I've done it, I've done it. Like, why would I play this character again? So for some actors, playing a character is going to be more about trying it out or challenging themselves to play someone new, I guess, and not about perfecting the character or growing the character over time. But I think keeping with the same character also presents a different set of challenges and requires a certain type of talent to pull that off over a long period of time. So I just feel like everyone is different and no one way is better than the other. All right, Peter Ustinov. I think it's Ustinov. Death on the Nile from 1978 and Evil Under the Sun. Ustinov played him genial. He had like a twinkly eye. He was very warm. I'll be honest with you, I love the 1978 Death on the Nile more for some of like the heavy hitters at the time than actual Poirot. This cast had Maggie Smith, Bette Davis, Angela Lansbury. Like, come on. But I'm not mad about Ustinov's performance. He's more of a charming presence rather than focusing more on Christie's precise clockwork mind for Poirot. And purists have treated him as the comfortable holiday version and treated it more like a cozy mystery screen adaptation than purely Christie. All right, we got to talk about Kenneth Branagh, the movie star reinvention, the sweeping CGI landscapes and the deliberately brooding tones. Whatever you think of these adaptations, I feel like Branagh proved two things. One, that there is a real commercial appetite for a reinvented Poirot, like a blockbuster version of Agatha Christie's characters, and that audiences are more hesitant when you trade the characters' quirks for a lot of grimness. There is a tight rope to walk across when it comes to Agatha Christie characters and needing these stories to be really dark. I went to all of these and I had mixed feelings the whole time. These adaptations were visually gorgeous. I wish there were more adaptations of mystery novels, like historical fiction mystery novels, with that kind of budget to make them so visually appealing. Like, say what you will about the stories in these particular adaptations, I kind of want to live in this world with Poirot. While I hated that mustache, you guys, that massive thing that went across half of his face like a cartoon villain, so ridiculous, I did love how seriously Branagh took Christie's work to be worth something with that big of a budget, that audiences would come for a big budget murder mystery and not just superhero films. Now, whether this really felt like Poirot is another argument, but it is proof that the bones of her characters and her stories and the settings she chose are always going to be exciting for audiences. But there was a lack of warmth, I felt like. Some of it was a bit too grim at times, but it still had that level of excitement and adventure. So I personally forgave it for some of the darkness, though I know a lot of Agatha Christie purists did not. Speaking of darkness, however, none of those adaptations can hold a candle to how grim and dark the John Malkovich ABC Murders adaptation was. Y'all, I have no words for this adaptation. I don't know who signed off on it, but this is easily the darkest, most melancholic, twisted Poirot to date. We get this bleak, weathered, deeply depressed Poirot that really divided viewers. And I think it was at the peak of when people were pushing back against these reboots, these Agatha Christie BBC reboots for years. I think that this adaptation was the straw that broke the camel's back. The tea is, and I just have to say, this is for entertainment purposes. This is just my opinion. Allegedly, and we're just speculating and talking. Okay, you got to do that on YouTube. But the tea is that Sarah Phelps's Agatha Christie adaptations, which were on the BBC, I think for a good 15 years in like the mid 2000s, they have always been incredibly divisive. And the big reason why people rebelled against them is not just because they were trying to modernize Christie. It's that they changed a lot of fundamental plot points of her stories and her characters and added in other subplots that had nothing to do with her original stories. And I get sometimes we try and modernize some of these books because authors of the past can have things in their books that we don't need on screen, and Agatha Christie sometimes is certainly one of them. But sometimes these were so grim and off the wall and so off the beaten path of Agatha Christie's original works that you're like, how are we stamping her name on this and calling it her story? At least with Branagh's films, there was something suspenseful and exciting about them with the music and the color grading and the grand setting that evokes a sense of mysterious whimsy. I remember walking out of all of those and feeling the way I felt watching something like The Mummy or National Treasure. And I'm not comparing those two films like that, or like, Pirates of the Caribbean. These have nothing to do with each other other than the fact that like you've walked out of them feeling like you've been on a bit of an adventure. And I feel like mystery should be included in that feeling of excitement, even when there is death and a bit of darkness. Christie's stories absolutely have dark, brutal elements, but they are also meant to be exciting. Like, you should walk away from an Agatha Christie murder mystery feeling charged and a bit on edge and fascinated by the darker sides of human nature. But these BBC adaptations and this, like the John Malkovich ABC Murders one, it just left you feeling like utterly depressed by the end. That is not what this genre is supposed to do. I don't know where we have gotten as a society where we decided that every single murder mystery has to be as edgy and messed up as True Detective. And I love True Detective, but it is a different type of thing. And films like the Knives Out series is proof that audiences want their murder mysteries to still explore complex themes and the darker parts of humanity, but to please, for God's sake, sprinkle in a little bit of whimsy, sprinkle in a little bit of fun and color and humor. That is what the murder mystery is supposed to do. If you want like noir, detective, dark girl with the dragon tattoo type stuff, then that's what you can go and watch, but that's not what Agatha Christie is meant to be, right? So do we need another Poirot adaptation at all? Like every other period drama I've ever talked about that has had an adaptation in the past, no, we don't. We don't need this, especially when we already have David Suchet's version. And it's not even like it's one episode or one season that was really good. Like he covered it all. Like Dear Lord in Heaven, he did it all. We have all of it. But is a young Poirot going to bring something different? By definition of this being the first young Poirot, yes, it is going to bring something different. Now, whether that's going to be a good or bad thing is yet to be determined, and in a lot of ways, it's going to depend on who's watching it to whether or not they think this was worth it or a good idea. But all we can do is talk about the news and the casting. So, let's get into Edward Bluemel as a young Poirot. I think, had I have not seen Edward Bluemel in My Lady Jane and didn't know who he was, I would be annoyed by this news, but I loved him in that. And that's why this has made me so intrigued for him to be a young Poirot. Edward Bluemel is known for Killing Eve and Sex Education, and then he got a starring role in My Lady Jane where he played Guilford Dudley. This is a cheeky character with lots of charisma, a healthy dose of comedic timing, very playful and very confident. But I feel like Edward Bluemel is the type to know the character that he's playing really well, and there is a preciseness to an actor who really has that knowledge of the person they're playing, which is perfect for Poirot. Now, My Lady Jane was a very non-serious, ridiculous, colorful, cheeky, historical romantasy that everyone loved. And yet he did take the role really seriously. But this show was so fun and so romantic, and him and the other lead had so much chemistry. I have no idea why they canceled it. Just a little goss. While they were casting the new Pride and Prejudice, someone commented on one of my videos saying that they saw him on a train reading the book. Now, this was, I don't know, a year or 2 years ago. And so there was speculation that he might be in the new Pride and Prejudice, like he was reading the book to be able to audition or whatever. And at the time I was like, I really feel like he would make an amazing Mr. Wickham. Like, he's more age-appropriate than Louis Partridge. I was not in the casting room. Dolly Alderton has her own artistic vision, and I'm just hoping that we will love that vision. But I would have loved to see an Edward Bluemel as a Mr. Wickham, to be honest with you. Sorry, I had to do it. We had to visualize it, okay? For you guys who are listening, I put up a photo of Edward Bluemel in a curly Poirot type mustache, and I just had to do it, okay? When I read the news that Edward Bluemel was going to be a young Poirot, my mind didn't go to like, can he do this? Does he fit Poirot? Can he pull it off? Because absolutely, I think he could. Like, to me, that's not a question. Like, I am not mad at this casting against my will, okay? The question to me is, should we be doing this? And should we trust the BBC with yet another Agatha Christie adaptation when audiences have been so unhappy with so many of the adaptations over the last like 15 years? If they focus on this being a straight up younger version of Poirot finding his feet and not making him some suave, always confident, like charming, haughty that doesn't fit the character of Hercule Poirot, then I think we could have a good shot at this being an interesting adaptation. But I am also worried because of this casting as well, because of how charming he's able to play characters, that I'm worried that they're going to try and move into that like hot space, which is what has been happening with period dramas so often recently, where it's like the hotness and the book talkification thing is at the top of the list, and then the character being the right fit and like true to the book is somewhere down here somewhere. You know what I mean? So I'm really hoping that this is going to be about Poirot and he doesn't need to be like conventionally attractive, that it is character focused first. You know what I mean? So what do we know about this adaptation? Well, it's a 6-part series titled Hercule, produced as a BBC and a BritBox co-production. The series is going to be written by Benji Walters, whose credits include Code of Silence, Obsession, and The Leopard, which is an Italian period drama that I enjoyed last year. It was sweeping and big and melodramatic. However, a lot of these are far more darker and thriller-esque than I would maybe want for an Agatha Christie adaptation. But we are trying to stay optimistic here, y'all. Trying to stay on the optimism train. So the hook of this new series is that it's going to cover Poirot's first cases in London before he became the world's most famous detective, and it's going to be more of an origin story rather than like Agatha Christie's classic country house whodunit. They did make him a bit attractive as a game character. I loved the different waistcoats that they put him in. They were very well fitted for the character, and he had like a preciseness about him as a young guy. The thing I do find most interesting about this that I've not seen a lot of people talk about is what was happening at the time in history and the kind of impact that would have had on Poirot's life. So Hercule Poirot is a Belgian refugee who fled to England after the First World War. When Germany invaded Belgium in 1914, hundreds of thousands of Belgian refugees came to Britain. It was one of the largest movements of displaced people the country ever absorbed. Poirot was in a real sense a tribute to a population Britain has since kind of forgotten about. You don't really hear about Belgian populations in the UK anymore. Like so many writers at the time, the war shaped Christie's writing and her characters. Poirot in England was an example of how chaotic life was during the war, how many people were ripped apart from their loved ones, how many of them had to find their place in a new culture. Poirot debuted in 1920 in The Mysterious Affair at Styles, into a country that had just lost a generation and witnessed chaos on an unimaginable scale. So everybody was hurting at the time. I feel like that the appeal of Golden Age detective fiction, you know, like puzzle-driven, reassuring, like order-restoring crime stories of the 20s and 30s was meant for comfort rather than gore in a time when it felt like everybody's lives were off kilter. It was a way for there to be a sure answer to stories and for justice to be served. But that brings me to why I am so incredibly torn about this new young Poirot show. Because on the one hand, there is a way to do an origin story here that could be deeply impactful, especially for all of us living in a world that feels so completely unsure right now. It could be fascinating to see a version of Poirot who is vulnerable. He's arriving into a completely new country and he doesn't know anyone. And that vulnerability could be what leads him to be the way that he is. They could have it to where we find out that his famous quirks maybe started as something like trauma responses. What if his urge to solve a mystery is just a psychological distraction from the devastating effects of the war and the magnitude of what he's lost? And seeing how that raw vulnerability eventually forged him into the man he becomes could be beautiful storytelling. But then on the other hand, I look at it and I think, isn't the entire appeal of characters like Poirot and Miss Marple the fact that they aren't the typical young demographic that dominates 99% of our media? Most of the stories that we read and watch and that people write are to do with young characters. And the best part about these types of characters is that we get to meet them when they're already fully developed and they're more sure of themselves and they've already survived the hardest, messiest parts of their lives, which is a bit of a comfort for audiences. It reminds me of years ago when they were in talks about a younger Miss Marple movie project with Jennifer Garner. And at the time, I thought that was really dumb. I was like, why would we need this? And no shade to Jennifer Garner, but she's also not British. So I was like, what is the point? The entire reason Miss Marple is appealing is because she's older and society underestimates her. And I somewhat feel that exact same way about Poirot. There are reasons why his age matters as to why we love him. Believe it or not, Agatha Christie's biggest regret was Poirot's age. She was annoyed that she'd aged him up too early. He was already older in 1920, which trapped her into writing a geriatric detective for nearly like 50 years of her career. She ended up resenting him a bit, like Arthur Conan Doyle did with Sherlock Holmes, and his popularity, and she wanted people to look at her other work. So in a way, this could be the version Christie herself would have wanted, of giving him a longer timeline to solve crimes. But it also means inventing a man that she didn't write. So whatever Hercule gives us isn't an adaptation. Like I said, it's basically a new character, and it's going to depend on how the BBC handles it as to whether people are up for it and feel like it has flavors enough of Poirot to get on board. Since the mid-2010s, the BBC's Christie adaptations have turned grim, but it really felt like they were of a time that we needed them to be like grimmer and edgier so that people thought that they were cooler. And I feel like we're coming out of that where like something doesn't have to be darker in order for it to be taken just as seriously and for it to be seen as something that's good. I think things like Heated Rivalry and the other Bennett sister have proven that having stories where there is some warmth in them and sometimes some lightness and it not needing to be super serious and grim all of the time shows that you can still take something really seriously and take them as a good example of great media and not need to put grimness in there just for the sake of like, well, now you're going to think this is award worthy. You know what I mean? Like grimness shouldn't be the default for this is better than other things. I do think with the war as a backdrop with this Hercule series, they could decide to go pretty dark, to make a younger Poirot a bit tortured before the order. And I worry that that is a Poirot that a lot of us just don't want. Like there is a reason why we really enjoyed David Suchet's performance, and it still had a lot of fun and darkness at the same time. And I think as audiences, we want to leave that level of grimness in the past. And so I am worried that they're going to deliver something again that a lot of audiences don't want. So this adaptation is coming out one way or another. So here is what I am hoping for it. I want them to bring the playfulness back rather than just another trauma backstory grief fest. I feel like Did They Ask Evans? That was an adaptation a couple years ago, and that did a great job. It was really bright and colorful and fun and quirky, but also had grim points and twisted plot points, right? And all of those things can exist at the same time, and that is the best way to do an Agatha Christie adaptation. It would be great if they focused more on making Poirot earnest and true to the character and interesting, and like we are falling in love with a character all over again, than them purposely like trying to make him hot. I do not want them to make Poirot hot and brooding. I want it to be a big deal that Poirot's character is the most important thing, not how marketable this character could be to a younger audience if we just make him hot or flirty or young or whatever. Bluemel has so much charisma, so I worry that they'll lean into that, which is not necessary for Poirot, but I also feel like he takes his like roles really seriously. So I'm not trying to claim that he would like do that on purpose. And I also think that there is truth to the fact that Suchet also brought a level of charm to the role, you know? I love when they're like, women only want one thing, and it's like big abs and whatever. And meanwhile, we're over here being like, Zaddy Poirot. There is something to the exactness and the quirkiness that some of us find attractive. I promise, if this feels like a true origin Poirot story, where it's just Poirot younger, he will naturally be endearing to us, to new audiences, without them needing to try hard. Plus, they've chosen someone that, already naturally is a good-looking guy, so you don't have to put in that much work, okay? So I'm nervous about this adaptation. I'm holding my reservations, and against my will, I keep saying this, I'm a little bit excited about this young Poirot anyways. Well, that is it for me, guys. What do you think? Are you excited about this adaptation? Are you apprehensive? Are you ready for a hot young Poirot? Or is the whole idea to you like sacrilege? And who is your definitive Poirot? I can't imagine for anyone that's anybody else but David Suchet. But if you have a different Poirot that you really like, put it in the comments. This is supposed to be a fun space. Let's not judge each other's choices, okay? You're allowed to love other adaptations. They are all there for us to enjoy. What we can all agree on is the old theme song. Let's not get copyright striked. I hope this new series gets just as epic of a theme song as that one. Thank you to everyone watching and to everyone listening on the audio side. Your feedback has meant so much. If you're enjoying the Rumor Mill, please consider subscribing to Regency Rumors, leaving a rating on the podcast if you're listening, subscribing to the Substack, whatever works for you. I love you, mon ami. Bye!